So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the kids exactly this set of instructions, literature circle directions, and you'll see that at the bottom there's a place for a parent to sign that they know their kid is doing this. So that the parents, that 5 out of 30, sadly, that you actually have, who check up on their kids, can actually know what their kids are doing. And those 3 out of 30 that you will actually have, where the parents want to come and see you after the first report card because their child has earned much lower grades than they expected, and they say, I didn't know my child had homework, you are going to be able to see, you see this signature? You signed here. This is it. This gets all the pressure off you. Okay, I don't need to read this through with you because right now we're just going to do it all. So we're going to turn the page, but you know that everything we're going to do has been written down so the kids have it to follow. And we'll turn the page. I use literature circles from the 3rd week of September until the very last week of June. You don't have to. But why would I not when it inspires the kids to do so much reading? If we looked back at the chart that said how many kids' books read, you'll see Ekaterina is down there somewhere, and Ekaterina read a lot of books, and I interviewed her and said, I interviewed all the kids, what do you think about lit circles? And I said, you know what, you read a lot of books in that first term, and yet you were new to my class. What happened? What were you thinking? And she said, well, in the very first day I heard everybody talking about lit circles, and it was clearly like the thing that was going on, and I didn't want to be left out, so I figured I better get involved. And so if you're lucky enough that as I have been some years, but not all years, when I'm lucky enough to have some kids spill over from one year to the next, boy, does that get the excitement going from the first time. So the kids, every year that I have my kids, you probably do the same. If you have a contract, you know that you're coming back the day after Labor Day and only seeing your kids for 1 hour. Every single year, those kids burst through my classroom for that 1 hour and say, can we start lit circles today? Actually, no, because you're not even staying in my class, and we're just together for these 3 days, and then you're moving on to new classes, but they always ask because it's a really big deal to them. I do lit circles all the time, but this recipe will work if you do it like Faye Brownlee uses a different system, but she only does lit circles in her class for 1 week of a term. She does picture books for the first term, and then she does lit circles in a different format, but she does lit circles just for 1 term. It will work if you have a contract and you're going to be in the classroom for 6 weeks. You can do it for that 6 weeks. The recipe works for however long you do it. Okay, class, we're going to be starting lit circles. You might have heard about lit circles. You might have had a different system before. I want to teach you how we're going to do lit circles. How many of you here like to talk? Good, I have one honest person in my class, a few people, okay, good. Well, I'm going to ask you to read and then give you a lot of time to talk about it and ask questions of each other and test each other, and it's really fun. But first, we have to know what you have to do. So you're going to be able to choose your own books. I'll be giving you like 5 or 6 choices, and you'll choose which one you want to be in. You're going to read a book at home, and you have to do hardly any written work at all, just preparing some questions so you have something to talk about, and then you'll be able to ask each other questions. So you are going to have to know what a fat question is and what a skinny question is. So the very first thing I need you to do is to understand the difference, because you have to be able to create both kinds. How many of you know the story of the 3 little pigs and the big bad wolf? Not everybody? Most people. Okay, good. Well, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to call out skinny or fat. A skinny question, you don't give the real answer, only say skinny or fat. Skinny question is, if you know the story, then you would have that answer. There's only one right answer, and everybody who knows the story would know that answer. If it's a fat question, we might all have different ideas or different opinions about it. Okay? What did the pigs make their houses with? Exactly. Why did each pig choose his particular building material? Fat. Which building material turned out to be stronger? How could the first 2 pigs have made their houses stronger? Why did the wolf want to blow down their houses? All right, see how well I predicted you? Look at the parenthesis. The group will be split. Some thinking that the wolf was obviously hungry, while others will think there could be a variety of possible reasons. Point this out as an example of the need to hear each other in an open-minded way. So for those of you who thought it was skinny, you thought he wanted to eat them, right? What could somebody think about what would be another reason that the wolf might have wanted to blow down the houses?
I think maybe the pigs did something mean to the wolf earlier in the year.
Oh, yes. Do you have a different idea?
He was jealous of their homes and wanted to
Oh, believe it or not, those are two answers I've never heard. So I love to point this out to the kids. So I'm talking to you as teachers, but as a class, I'd be saying to you, so remember that when you're sitting with a lit circle group and you ask, somebody asks a question as a fat, juicy question, you say, that's not a fat, juicy question. Instead of that, keep an open mind and say, wow, you said that was a fat, juicy question, and I thought there was only one right answer. I thought the answer was this. How could it be something else? What ideas did you have? And you're making yourself open to the asker that there might be more than one way to build a rocking chair. Today I'm going to read to you chapter 1 of our new read aloud novel, which is called Poppy. And while I'm reading it to you, what I want you to do is just have a scrap of paper beside you, and I want you to try and write down one skinny question and one fat, juicy question about the book that I'm reading. So the chapter. You can write more questions if you like, and it's just a scrap of paper. But at the end of when I've read chapter 1 of Poppy, then I want you to, in your groups, ask each other the fat questions and the skinny questions. Day 2, I'm going to say, let us repeat the poem of Humpty Dumpty. Could we all say it together, please? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Think about that for a moment. Now, most of us have a picture of an egg. But was there anything actually said about the egg in the poem? No. There's a lot of fat, juicy questions that could be asked about Humpty Dumpty. What do you think you might want to know? So now what I want you to do is I want you to, in class, you would be in your pods, and I would want you to turn together in your pods and go around the circle asking each other questions about Humpty Dumpty. Once you're all together in a group, your first job is to find out who has the shortest left pinky finger. And that person has to put their hand up, and you need to do this quickly. Go. All right, excellent. All right, person with your hand up. You are the starter, and you have 2 important jobs. Your very first job is to ask the first fat, juicy question that you can think of about Humpty Dumpty. And if you, so for instance, no, I'm not even going to give you examples. I'm sure you can come up with your own. You can ask a fat, juicy question, and you're going to look to see who has their hand up, and you're going to call on them to answer. So supposing you asked the question and Todd had his hand up and you called on Todd, and you listened to his answer, then you would say, can anybody add on to that or have a different idea? And you'll be asking for 2 people from your group before you move on. The last person who gets to answer the fat, juicy question is yourself. So you might say, I was thinking the same as Todd, or I had a totally different idea. This is what my idea was. And then the group, it goes to the next person, and I teach my class on the very first day, every day in September. Everything always goes clockwise, partly because they have to still remember what an analog clock looks like, because it won't be for the rest of their lives to even have that image, I don't think. But everything goes clockwise, and so once I teach them that's true on field trips, it's true in the gym, it's true in every environment, everything goes clockwise. I never have to answer that question again. So it goes clockwise to the next person who asks a fat, juicy question. Children, Today, only today, you can pass because I didn't give you any homework to think of fat, juicy questions. When you have your literature circle, it's your homework piece. It's to think of a fat, juicy question. In fact, 2 fat, juicy questions, so you won't be allowed to pass. But today you can pass if you can't think of anything. Starter, the person with the hand up, I told you had 2 jobs. One is to start. The second thing is that once it's gone all around the circle and everybody's had a chance to ask a fat, juicy question, you have to put your hand up, and you have to keep your hand up until I've noticed it and let you know that you can put your hand down. The reason is, hands are going to be going up and down as people are answering questions, and so I can't tell by the hand unless your hand's up long enough. Children are really good at this, and you want to teach them how to do this for all SMART group right from the very first week. When your group is finished, someone in your group has to put up your hand and hold it up there until it's acknowledged by the teacher. So I know that your group is finished, and you have to keep it going. So you've got your hand up because you're the starter, but then you keep asking questions around because other groups might take longer. Children are really good at this. Teachers are lousy at it. Let's see if you will be a completely remarkable cohort. Starters, ask fat, juicy questions about Humpty Dumpty. Has anybody got any questions about the task? Yes?
Once the starters ask a fat, juicy question, does the next person ask theirs?
Yes, exactly.
First they ask, everyone answers their question, and move on to the second person, and they ask their question?
That's right. And for the interest of time, just because I want everybody to get a chance to ask a question, don't accept more than 2 responses, even if everybody's hand goes up. In a literature circle, you're going to teach the kids. The kids will have more time than you do. They've got all year. You've got half of a morning. So they will ask everybody who has got something to say. Begin. And freeze. At this point in my class, I would then be asking, did anybody hear a question or an answer that's something that they'd never thought of?
How could the king's horses get involved? Tanya gave the controversial answer that glue is made of horse hooves. I've never considered that.
Awesome. Okay, so the reason that you would go to each group after this first activity, you would do this, you would give this example so that if anybody is in a group didn't quite understand how to do a fat, juicy question, they're hearing some variety of examples, which is going to help to seed success for your own lit circles. Day 2 was Humpty Dumpty, and then I'm going to read to you chapter 2 of Poppy, and I say today you don't need to worry about the skinny questions, the fact questions. Today I just want you to write down at least 1 fat, juicy question, 1 or 2, that you can ask your group after I've finished reading Poppy. So now we've done 2 things of building on their familiarity. They've used a familiar folk tale that they know as good background, and now they're being able to transfer that skill to the new read aloud book that you're using. I do this because it's moving my read aloud forward. I'm starting my read aloud in week 1 of my own class. I'm able to use that to build the common knowledge, to build the skills. Because what is the one thing that is most limited for us as teachers? Time. Absolutely. Time in the classroom and time in home for preparation. So this recipe for Lit Circles is based on trying to maximize time. I have my kids do all of their reading at home so that I never have to provide silent reading time of any trashy novel or graphic novel or comic book that they want to read. I don't have to have them use up class time for silent reading because they're already reading far more than I tell them that they have to. So I've regained that traditional time. Doesn't mean that they don't read in the classroom. I might have them read together buddy poetry or read together a science book. There's lots of reading that they can do, but I have not for 20 years had kids bring a book from home where I have no idea about the value of that reading. They're doing all of that kind of reading at home from a book that I've pre-approved. And the same way, I use Adrienne Gear's reading powers. I love them, use them all, but I don't actually teach use whole picture books and try and do the teaching of those lessons, of those reading powers. Instead of that, I'm trying to conserve time. So I do all my reading strategies either through my read aloud or through their lit circles. I join the literature circle and say, you guys, we're all talking about chapter 4, 5, and 6 of Breadwinner this week. What could you infer was happening when what would you infer the kids were feeling when they watched the thieves having their hands cut off? What would you infer those girls were thinking about? That's an inference. The author doesn't tell us that, but that's something. So I'm teaching that lesson embedded in a short time in their lit circle. So all of the background time of the reading is done on their own time at home. Or I'm using my read aloud, so I'm going to teach the strategies of lit circles with my daily read aloud, so I don't have to get yet another book and use another bit of time to teach them something. Then in day 3, I would have them generate connections for Goldilocks or Cinderella, and then a chapter of the read aloud book. And on day 4, I want to make sure they know how to use a dictionary so they can follow the instructions. So when I do this, so on day 3, I am going to have the kids, so I'm always starting with a familiar story in small groups to warm up their brains. And because it's fun and funny, they've had their whole lives, most of them. Well, not so much. I teach in Burnaby, where almost all of my children started their lives somewhere else. It's probably true for you too. So sometimes Goldilocks is not a familiar story, so I do have to tell that story. I do give this workshop around the province, and in other places everyone knows the story of Goldilocks, but not so much where we're living and working. So I give the chance to do connections and give the example of you want to add on. And we want to coach each other over the course of the year to give even juicier connections. So if, for instance, we were reading a book of Judy Moody, a Judy Moody novel, and somebody said, I know somebody named Judy, I would encourage the group, that's a connection for sure. But I encourage the group to say, can you figure out how to make that juicier? Like, in what ways is the Judy you know alike, like Judy Moody? Or in what way is she different than Judy Moody? Okay, so we would do that. And then once we have done it for a familiar story, then I'm going to read chapter 3 of our read aloud book. And then I'm going to ask you in your small groups to make connections with that. Now you have all the tools you need to be able to do your own lit circle groups.